we're going to hear from Jonathan Garb. Please go ahead.
Social vision is a genuine breakthrough. I'd like to frame the context of this breakthrough, that it's a commonplace that the study of Hasidism is rather sharply bifurcated between the more phenomenological, theological approach and the more socio-historical approach. Now, within the sociological approach to Hasidism, the usual idea is to interpret Hasidism according to sociological theory. In other words, according to the products of Western academe, most of which was created in the 20th century. Now, what Wexler does is to reverse, it's almost like a Copernican shift. He says, rather than interpret Hasidism through sociological theory, use Hasidism as a resource for sociological theory. So I'd like to put it in my own terms that Wexler is basically asking us to position Hasidism and the giants of sociology or 20th century sociology, such as Weber or Durkheim, to put them side by side rather than giving any hierarchical preference to one over the other. And from his point of view, it's no more logical to interpret Durkheim according to Chabad. It's more just as logical to interpret Durkheim or Weber according to Chabad than to interpret Chabad according to Durkheim and Weber. Because why? And again, I'm using it now, my terms, not Philip's terms, because they're both products of the 20th century. And I think there's a phrase that I think, using the language of a Rebbe himself, of Ramam, as I'll henceforth refer to him, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he says Torah innovation is historically situated. Of course, this is not what the Ramam meant by when he made that statement. I'm using his language in order to say that what Wexler is showing is the deep historical situation of sociological theory, which enables him to put sociological theory and Hasidism in a more horizontal rather than vertical relationship. Now, there he's actually, I think that Philip, if you put him in a wider frame, is joining the move, which I think is being commenced by Elliot Wolfson and by Anthony Steinbock, whose book on verticality is basically referred to in the title of a session, that both of them see that Chabad can be a resource for understanding religion in a comparative sense, in a theoretical sense. Elliot is turning more to the Eastern traditions, in certain Buddhist traditions in his Open Secret, and Anthony Steinbock is going more to Western, classical Western monotheistic traditions, but it's basically a similar move. And I want to put Philip together with this move. And it's saying that Chabad is actually, whether it's early Chabad, like Steinbock's book, or later Chabad, in case of Elliot or Philip, Chabad is actually a resource for theoretical innovation, which is why I use the quote from the Rebbe about innovation. Now, I think it is very interesting the turn to the East, turn to Buddhism in Open Secret, because the Rebbe was one of the thinkers who in the 1960s was one of the first people inside the Jewish world to give a response to the idea of the influence of Buddhist meditation on American culture in the revolution of the 1960s. So I want to zoom in now and to position the Rebbe as part of a history of American religion, which is a move also Shaul Magid makes, and specifically the context of the 1960s. Now, the 1960s, the whole turbulence, the whole social unrest of the 1960s were, of course, also a formative period also for the young Philip Wexler. I think there's a sort of autobiographical element in his discussion quite early in the book of the 1960s. Now, Wexler quotes a quote from the crucial year of 1967. 1967 is a very important year because this is the year that the Rebbe was really propelled into the forefront of Israeli public attention. And the Rebbe, he notes how the Rebbe diagnoses the unrest of the 60s, and he speaks about the lack of conciliation between the mind and the heart. So I want to focus in now on the question of a conciliation between the mind and the heart and related to verticality, this time as a concept, not just as a book title, and to speak about the mind and the heart of what I would call psychosomatic or psychophysical verticality. We've got in classical Chabad already in the Alter Rebbe, already in Sefer HaTanya, we have the idea of a head ruling the heart, which is something which, of course, the Rebbe refers to in this 1967 talk, but especially the idea of the Rebbe himself as the head, that the Rebbe is the initials, the acronym Rosh Bnei Israel, yes, the left is Rebbe, that the Rebbe is the head of the people of Israel, and the head really rules the entire body. So this is the verticality. We've got the head, which rules the heart, the Rebbe, which rules the people. That's the theological model or the psychological model of the mind and the heart, and the sociological model of the Rebbe ruling the people. Now, in later Chabad thought this is modified. There's a three-dimensional idea of the depth of the heart, That's more in the Rebbe Rasha, but let's go back to Wexler rather than, if we get into the whole field of later Chabad, we'll stray off a track. So I want to stay with this 1967 talk. And I want to speak about the question of ritual. Now, the word ritual doesn't appear in the index. It doesn't play a major role in social vision, but it has an important role in social vision. And he uses a very good formulation in page 57. He writes, ritual observance is a fundamental mechanism for the regulated conciliation of the mind and the heart. So social unrest comes because of lack of conciliation of the mind and the heart, and ritual is a mechanism for the regulated conciliation of the mind and heart. And then he put it earlier on Wexler, Ramam really did see the ritual structures of the Torah lifestyle as channels for suitable transformation of human consciousness. Now, channel is a very important idea because channel means, again, flow, vertical flow from top to below. That's the idea of a channel, especially in Kabbalah and Hasidut. And the idea that the ritual is what connects the higher and the lower, creates a channel, a transformative channel, as Wexler puts it. Now, he shows there that the Rebbe saw the first of his 10 campaigns, his Mivtzaim, the Tefillin campaign, as a mechanism to bring about the conciliation of the mind and the heart, because the tefillin, the head tefillin for the mind, the hand tefillin for the heart, the connection, which is symbolized by the chords. And this is what will repair the social unrest of the 1960s. Now, this is exactly the same trope that he used in the Six-Day War, because he said that the head tefillin, based on the Talmudic saying, he said the head tefillin will lead to the victory in the Six-Day War. So his famous, one could call it prophecy of the swift Israeli victory in the Six-Day War, was based on this idea of the tefillin as creating the deterrence and creating the victory. Now, I have a historical comment that another great 20th century Jewish mystic, Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen Cook, he actually launched his career with a mission tour throughout Jewish communities in Eastern Europe to propagate the correct observance of tefillin. In the case of the Rebbe in 1967, it's already that people should put on tefillin at all. In the case of Rav Kook, it's just they should put him in the right place on the head. It's the head tefillin. That is his focus. And this is his first book. Chavash Pe'er, his first book was a book about tefillin. So we could do almost a history here of a ritual object. That is, we can take a material history in a sense, but from a Rebbe's point of view, I think material history and intellectual history are one, in the terms described before by Elliot, that the material world itself will reveal divinity or become opaque in a sense to divinity in a very complex dialectical process. But the bottom line is the material world will reveal divinity. So the material and intellectual history are one. So the history of a tefillin as a material object is also the history of ritual, the history of a head and a heart, and so on and so forth. So now this goes far beyond, I think, using Wexler's own methodology, we can say that Durkheim put the totem, the ritual object, in the center of his sociology of religion. And here we can find an indigenous Hasidic approach to the ritual object as the center of religion through following this 20th century history of tefillin. Now, since it's almost physically impossible for me to speak without referring to a text, I'll draw near conclusion by referring to a later talk from 1967, Parashat Mishpatim. When I put this up on my website, I'll put in all the footnotes, of course. And the Rebbe poses a tremendous question, yes? Gewaltige Kashya, Kushiatzuma. If the ultimate truth, and this echoes actually the Buddhist theory that you've got a relative truth and absolute truth. So he says, if the ultimate truth is that the parchment of tefillin, the parchment, and he says tefillin is just a model here for the whole Torah, is already divine. So how can the Torah of truth claim that the parchment is mundane until you do the whole process that the scribe has to write it, L'Shem Tefillin, with all the special laws of tefillin, and has to make it holy? The parchment is already holy. And you can't say the Torah is only referring to our relative perspective, because it's a Torah of truth. So the Torah cannot negate the absolute truth that the parchment of tefillin is already holy. And he says, furthermore, from a point of view of ultimate truth, there's no ink and there's no parchment. That is, the very existence of separate objects, such as ink and parchment, is negated. Or in the language of a movie, The Matrix, there is no spoon. So there is no tefillin, there is no ink, there is no parchment. So I agree with Rebbe that this is a very powerful kushia. I don't want to go into the answer. The answer is very complex. It's tens of pages, this answer. I'll just say a teaser that it's a very complicated analysis of the 7th chapter of the second part of Tanya, Shara Yichud Ve'emunah. But I want to say how this quote shows that the Rebbe is a radical theological thinker that we see in his question. The fact that he takes such trouble to answer the question shows that he's also deeply committed as Elliot has also shown, to a certain Jewish tradition, to a tradition of Chabad, to a tradition of an entire chain of Jewish tradition, which in some way constrains his radicality. And there's a tension, it's a creative tension between his own theological thrust and between the situation in which he operates, which is not just the situation of 1967 of America and so on and so forth, or as the previous Rebbe said, the sixth Rebbe, America is not different. So if America is not different, it means to say the situation we find ourselves now is part of the totality of the Jewish tradition and has to be continuous with it. So now, Philip in 193 in his book, he speaks about the enmeshment of divinity of every human action in which each person has the power to turn divinity against itself. I think it's also a very radical theological statement, and I'm grateful to Philip for uncovering or for underlining the statement that the Rebbe is basically saying that human beings can turn the divine against itself. Again, it's a very radical theology. And I think one of the achievements of the book is to show that such a radical theologian can also be a social leader. And a social leader has all kinds of constraints, and some of them are indeed conservative constraints. I think the book, in a way, pushes the progressive aspects of a Rebbe. He uses the word progressive in a book, which is a very charged word today in America. But of course, it's a very strong conservative function operating here as well, which I think one could write almost a mirror book for social vision to show the Rebbe as a conservative thinker. It's a bit like Neil Postman. He wrote, education is a subversive activity, and then he wrote a few years later, education is a conservative activity. I'm looking forward to Philip's book on the Rebbe as a conservative figure. Now, as the Mishnaic story, which is in the context of the holidays of Tishrei coming up, says, Yoter mima shekarati lifnechem yesh kan. Katuv kan. Yes, more than what I've read to you is written here. There's much more in this book than what I could do justice to in these few words, but I hope this will illustrate how Philip can galvanize and tantalize and really arouse discussion and further discussion. And I wish him that he should further this discussion himself and that all of us should join in it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll say amen to that. Very nice, thank you. Okay, Leore, your turn. Please take it away. Please unmute yourself.
Could I share my screen, please?
Sure. Do you see that option at the bottom?
But it's disabled.
Okay, let me just take a look at that.
Okay, while you're enabling my screen, I would like to start. I'm very honored and humbled as well to be part of this panel with the world-renowned Kabbalah scholars who are my teachers, Professor Elliot Wolfson and Professor Jonathan Garb, and I hope that I'm able to contribute something for this discussion that is worthwhile on such a profound topic as verticality and Hasidism social ethos. Is my screen good? Let's see. One moment. Okay, it will take me another moment to start my screen. In the meanwhile, social vision, like some of the previous works by Professor Wexler, demonstrate that the social application of Jewish mystical ideas, that is, ideas have power to transform and shape social change and organization. And in this period of virtual social connectedness that we are experiencing, it's very interesting to think how this virtual and reality has implication of how we experience society. So due to different vision of core values, they suggest, the authors of this book, that the culture the Hasidic culture offers a valuable alternative to capitalist Western culture, albeit their shared context. And in this, the writers are not only aspiring to observe and explain the social visions of the subject matter of their study, but through writing, publicizing, and convening a conference like this, they participating themselves in the social change and vision that they're writing about. They're not only communicating the social goals and innovations they observe in Lubavitcher's social vision, but they also identify themselves with these goals and demonstrate how they are crafting a social vision in the way they're translating the Hasidic ideas from Yiddish to English, from Hasidic and mystical language to sociological and universal language. And in this act, they're participating in maybe Chabad outreach goals in the adaptation of the social vision and a call for social change. So this is my general remark, and now I want to focus on more specific. But why can't I see my? Let's see again. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you. Okay, so what I want to do in this lecture is contextualize the three loves, which are one, it's the mystical idea cited in social vision, and offer some observation about the context, the sources, and contemporary adaptations, and finish with a short observation of a suggestion for further research and beyond the Rebbe's vision to actual Hasidim. So I'm focusing on one passage cited in page 83 that discusses the three loves. The first thing people want to hear, so the Rebbe is saying the statement in Yiddish, and I'll show the Yiddish soon after this slide. When he arrives to America in 1951, he needs to choose a statement. And he is aware that the statement people are looking to hear for something innovative, something provocative. And the statement he chooses to talk about is this: there is love of God and there is love of Torah, and there is love of the Jewish people. And these three things are all one. And the authors of the book bring this statement because the Rebbe is aware of the social statement, and he's also elaborates the importance of the love for human beings or the Jewish people in order to attain the higher goal of love of God, and it has to go through human beings. And now I would like to raise a question of the competing loves, and the saying that all loves are one does not recognize the tension between different loves, and like people experience the tension and conflictual love, types of love, environment versus Jewish community versus animals, religious, myself, and all these different loves do not get treated in a more conflictual way, but are unified into one love. And Professor Wolfson has elaborated in his previous talk about the paradox and the conflict between the Jewish chosenness and who are we commanded to love. When there is the commandment of love, who is included and who is excluded. And although the book aspires to an universal agenda, the particularism and the chosenness of the Jewish people is a core conflict in this ideology, and it's deep rooted in medieval times, and I will touch upon it a little later. And I wanted, before we continue, to bring the original of the text, and it's not really a text. Sichot Kodesh is rewriting of students that wrote what they heard from the Rebbe, and it was in Yiddish, and I thought it would be nice to see the original. So the Rebbe kommuniziert in Amerika hat gesagt, da in Amerika hat man lieb Herrn Akruz, הדבר חידוש, noch besser, הדבר המבהיל את הרעיון, es heißt a statement. And then he doesn't know if it's really radical, but he knows that's what people expect him when he comes to America. And then he says, דדרי אהבות, אהבת השם, אהבת הסורה, התורה ונאהבת ישראל, כל אחד. מכן נטפון der Silence Vision, זה warum sie ist כל אחד, ואין עצם, So essentially, they're all one in their essence. And das deine Chut המשולש, was lo inatek, und das wird euch bringen zu der Geula. So there's a messianic spice from the beginning. The statement, by practicing it, by actualizing it, will bring the Geula, the Messiah. So I would like to shed some light on the source of this saying. This dictum was in research was supposed to be the best idea, but Isaiah Tishby showed in his article that this idea, Kucha Brichu, Raita V'Israel Kul Echad, is in the Ramchal, the Italian modern Kabbalist, and Mitnagdim and Hasidim use these statements, and it's not just a Hasidic idea. So it's interesting for me when we explore social vision as a Hasidic vision. Are there differences between Mitnagdim applications of the social ideas of Kabbalah, or they share a common social ethos? And Mendel Pekaj, in his book Between Ideology and Reality, shows the problematic way that Hasidic reading of this mystical idea of love of friends, and like Professor Wolfson noted, who is included in this love of friends, and the neighbor is only the Jew. And also I think Professor Garb talked about the organism, that the head is the Rebbe, is loved more than the toes. So even in this idea of love, it's not an egalitarian love. There's a hierarchy between the different parts and limbs in this organism. And how do modern people that live today could identify with these hierarchical ideas is a question for readers of this book. And because Professor Wolfson spoke more about this, the roots of this idea, I will just summarize. In Open Secret, Professor Wolfson writes this when he summarized the paradox between Jewish chosenness and universal responsibility. One should be struck straight away by a balanced contradiction. On the one hand, the intrinsic nature of the Jew, in contrast to the non-Jew, is tagged as the ability to be integrated in the essence, and we saw the etzem before in Yiddish, the essence. But on the other hand, in that essence, opposite are no longer distinguishable, whence it should follow that the division between Jew and non-Jew should itself be subject to subversion. I'm not sure this is reconciled, and the competing loves are reconciled in the Rebbe's framework, but we have more experts than myself to answer this question. What I would like to ask, one of the arguments of this book, that the core values of Hasidism apply to different social organization, different sociological ideas, but the commandment to love is also shared with the Christians. So we see the works of love is a very profound commandment, and also the idea of the organism is shared with the ecclesia. The idea of the Christian church as one organism and is the manifestation of the divine essence. So in what way would we explain the difference in the capitalistic ideas in Christianity and the different sociological ideas in the Jewish Hasidism if they share this idea of the holy body of the group, of the community, as a manifestation that excludes others? I would like to hear more insights about this. And also in this holy body, the king also has a different, a special place, and we could maybe compare the king's role and the Messiah or Rebbe's role. Another contemporary I would like to suggest, and Professor Garb also talked about the cook, and he wrote a lot about it, but contemporary mystical leader that also was a social leader and had a lot of influence in Israel was Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the son of Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook. And comparing between the Rebbe Lubavitcher and Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Cohen Kook emphasizes the difference between the mystical translation of the Kabbalistic text and for diaspora Judaism and versus for Zionist national mysticism. So in 1917, it's a few years, sorry, it's not 1917, sorry, it's 1957. It's my mistake, 1957, a few years apart from the passage we read from Schneerson. In a talk of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda for Ezra, a youth group, he speaks about the two essential points, and this is my translation. The acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven is unified and grow through the Torah, and this is unified and the unity, Achdut Israel, their love of their fraternity, Vatachvatam, that is unified and grows in the land of Israel. So he ties this unification between the Torah, the yoke of heaven, Avat Israel, the three loves, the God, Israel, and the Torah, but he adds a component in the land of Israel that we don't find in Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I think comparing them and putting them in this context emphasize the difference in translating this mystical Kabbalistic idea for Zionist Jews versus diaspora Jewishness. And it's interesting, if we spoke about the love, the particular love versus universal love, to read Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda's father, and his attempt to configure love for all creatures beyond the Jewish nation, but he also has this tradition of Jewish chosenness. And he writes a few passages that were collected in his work Midot HaRaya. Most of them are from the first Kovetz from Shmona Kvatzim. I put here only one passage that also talks about these three loves that we spoke about, but instead of the love of Israel, he talks about the love of all creatures. So I'll read shortly. It is impossible not to love God, and it is impossible that this power of sweet love does not nurture a practical outcome. To love, to act in practice, in deeds, and I'm sorry, this translation is, I wrote it quickly today, but I'll continue. It is impossible not to love Torah and the commandments. It is impossible not to be full of love to every creature. So we have here the love of God in the beginning, the love of Torah, but he transitions and changes instead of love of Israel, he speaks now love of all creatures. And this is another topic to compare the mystical translation of the sociological and social ethos of mystical traditions and how they are moderated in different modern contexts. I will finish with a short note that one of the most interesting things that were analyzed in the book is the Aleph Institute and the idea of prisons and the Rebbe Lubavitch participation in a social change in the incarnation of prisoners. And what I found interesting about this is that here in this chapter, the authors not only cited the Rebbe's ideas, but also the Aleph Institute and their website. And I think this is a promising direction for future research to, if we're interested in social vision and in social and mystical society, to move beyond the Rebbe's vision and investigate and observe Hasidim themselves. How do they understand their social mystical ideas, and how do they practice these ideas? And and these days are give the opportunity that a Kabbalah scholar of medieval times or even early modern times don't have this various datas and research and media to investigate the rank and file, the ordinary people. And I would like to hear more about how Hasidim live the ethos of mystical society. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you everyone for your presentations. This morning in our first session for Social Vision, we had 3 very diverse topics and we were able to weave them together in our discussion. I think here it will be a lot clearer that each person spoke about something very related, and I think the conversations flowed together very nicely. So now we'll open up the floor to our panelists to reflect, respond, ask questions, and then we'll take other questions.
Well, if no one else has a burning question, maybe I've got one question for Elliot and a question and comment for Leore. My question for Elliot is, when the Rebbe did something quite remarkable, because a lot of people, let's say in Chabad and otherwise, were not entirely happy with the David Dinkins, the first black mayor, I think, of New York City, especially in the background of the Crown Heights riots. And then when the Rebbe came and said, we want people. So the usual Chabad interpretation of that is a bit like Rav Soloveitchik's statements that he said one people in the sense of citizenship. Just like Rav Soloveitchik says that the commonality of a non-Jewish world is in joint citizenship, but not in our religious life. So my question to Elliot is, do you agree with this Chabad interpretation, or do you think the Rebbe said something more radical at that moment?
Thank you for that. I think it's similar to Soloveitchik in the sense that we still have to maintain some dichotomy here. And I wouldn't say it's dissimilitude. I think when the Rebbe spoke this way in relationship to Dinkins, and also when Dinkins came for one of the dollars, getting a dollar, the Rebbe said to him, we're all created in the divine image. But still, there is a dichotomy here. He wasn't revealing completely, what is at the core of his thinking. However, it's different in Soloveitchik because the Rebbe did, through the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, intensively and aggressively try to rope in the non-Jew in the Messianic drama. So we can't maintain that distinction that Soloveitchik maintained. It somewhat breaks down. And that leads to what, as you pointed out, and I think Leore also points out, to a very creative tension. There's a very creative tension here. So when I spoke of the problems of the Lahavdil, it wasn't to denigrate, but it was only to accentuate the complexity and really the creative tension that is in the Rebbe's teaching.
Okay, thank you. I think it clarifies for me at least. Leore, since you're more of a medievalist than I am, I wanted to ask if you think, just following on what you said, whether you think, for instance, the term in the Zohar, Gufa de Malka, the body of God, the body of a king, is related to the idea of medieval ideas of the body of a king, and to the idea of Corpus Christi, the idea of the church as God's body. That's a question. And my comment, when you speak about the Rav Tziyuda, it's very interesting because seemingly Rav Tziyuda, the whole triangle of Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Torat Yisrael, you probably know the song, yes? So this whole triangle seems to replace the triangle of God, the Torah and Israel. Basically, the land of Israel replaces God, which Rav Harlap, for instance, another student of Rav Kook, said that basically the land of Israel is God in a way, yes. So but actually in 1967, in the same year, the Rebbe's got a talk in which he does speak about the triangle of a land, the people, and the Torah. And he speaks very, very strongly. It's I think one of his strongest pro-Eretz Israel statements in the whole corpus, precisely in 67. I can't remember if it's before the war or after the war. If it's after the war, of course, it's very significant. If it's before the war, maybe a bit less. Anyway, so that's my comment, and then there's a question. You're on mute. I think you muted. It's it.
So the triangle of Avat Israel, Eretz Israel, and Am Israel is something in youth groups, Bnei Akiva grow up on this triangle. And I looked for its sources, and it's from a Mizrahi conference in, I think, 1907. And so it was even before mystical ideas, or maybe it's on the subtext. So yes, it's a very interesting, and it's an interesting note that the Rabbi Lubavitcher himself also expressed this. And about the Gufa de Malka, it's an interesting, I never thought about that in this context, but the idea of the organic body is very prevalent in medieval texts, in the Zohar, and Rabbi Yosef Abba Mishushan that I studied, and it has very close relations to the ideas of the ecclesia, and maybe it's the way of Jewish people to adapt these ideas. So I think it is parallel. Maybe Professor Wolfson has something to add.
No, I agree with you. The only thing I would add here is, well, I don't want to open a can of worms here, but the gender dimension is very significant because the Corpus Christi is the church, but the church is also assimilated to the image of Mary. So analogously, there's an interesting relationship here between Gufa de Malka as Tiferet or HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah. That's the only thing I would add. I mean, there's much more to say on that, but...
But would you say Gufa de Malka is only Tiferet, or the Guf is the Shekhinah and the Malka is Tiferet, and she becomes the vessel of... And usually when they talk about the Guf, it is the soul of Israel comprised the limbs of Shekhinah. And
exactly.
So,
yeah, I totally agree. But I didn't want to get into it, but thank you. That's what's going on here. Yeah, I agree.
So I just want to jump in. There's another source. I read a letter from the Rebbe about someone who wrote to him about how to deal with anti-Semitism. And his response was that the world should know that we come from Adam, from one person. And the reason why, he said in this letter, the reason why God created that all humanity should stem from one person, rather than God creating each nation coming from a separate body, is to know that we're ultimately one. And there's more that unites us and divides us. So it's interesting to look in different places and to see this tension, as you were saying, because it's certainly there, but I also think that the Rebbe's vision for possibly America in particular was that there should be ways in which that tension is overcome in order to bring the Hasidic ethos into American culture specifically. So if you're thinking about the Rebbe's idea of having a moment of silence in schools, that's not necessarily, I think that's something that's deeply rooted in his vision of bringing a recognition of God into society. That's in a way universal. But speaking of the 60s, there's another story where a hippie comes to the Rebbe and says, "Where is God?" This is a famous story. He says, "Where is God?" over and over, and the Rebbe keeps telling him he's in every place, he's in all these things. And then the man says, "Well, what about Jewish particularism?" That really bothers him. And the Rebbe says, the goal of a Jew is to be a Jew. The goal of a black man is to be who he is as a black man. The goal of an Indian man is to be who he is as an Indian man. And so there is this concept of an essence that is unique to a Jew, and then an essence that we were saying is also unique to a non-Jew. And I thought that was very interesting, Professor Wilson, when you were saying that to subsume the non-Jew into the essence of the Jew would then remove the essence of the non-Jew. So there are things to look into more there. And one last note, I think, Leore, I'm an ethnographer. That's kind of my background. And so I think looking at what the Hasidim do is very important in this regard. I remember thinking it was fascinating when COVID happened. I believe it was during the month of Ramadan. And a lot of the shluchim in Africa were distributing packages of food to Muslims. And it's interesting in general that there are a lot of African countries have Chabad rabbis and rebbetzins that are there, and a lot of the work they do is with non-Jews in those places. And so it's interesting to see how they reconcile that with their mission as emissaries of the Rebbe. So there's a lot more to look at. It looks like we have someone in the audience raising his hand. Let's see. Nathaniel Berman, would like to join us? I think that worked. There we go.
Should I go?
Sure,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for these amazing talks. Really is an honor to listen to them. I have so many questions, but let me just ask something about the current intellectual climate, and really get triggered by something Chava just said, right? And very, very much provoked by Elliot's amazing talk. As well as the historically locating it in the 60s, like that Joni said. There was a time in the United States when the issue was between universalism and particularism, and that's certainly still true today. And that was certainly a thing in the 60s and 70s, the upsurge of ethnic pride, and so on and so forth. The current intellectual moment, at least among the younger generation, in my experience of it as a college professor, is that is no longer where the real tension is. The real tension for people is mixed identities, trans identities, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, in terms of all sorts of things. It's the crossovers. It's the place where identities move into each other. And that's a very different intellectual moment, again, especially among the younger generation, than the older particularism, universalism thing. And rightly or wrongly, and perhaps I'm wrong, I see in the Zohar, precisely because it's a poetic text, that it has the resources to collapse the dichotomies, maybe reading against the intention of its authors. But I think the text has resources in it for collapsing some of those dichotomies. And really triggered by the last thing you said, Chava, about how everyone their goal is to be true to their essence. And again, I see the current intellectual moment is very much propelled by a rebellion against essence and a desire for crossovers, trans identities on all kinds of planes, giving rise to controversies, for example, about cultural appropriation. But that itself is a symptom of a period of mixing. And I wondered if there's, basically I'm looking for responses by all of you. Thank you.
And I would like to respond, because I wanted to also respond to the previous comments, but I'll tie it together. I think you're absolutely right, Nathaniel. From the point of view of the Rebbe, this is a disaster. This mixing, this obliteration of boundaries. It's really Bavel, right? So when he says to someone that to uphold, it's the essence of the Jew is to be a Jew, the essence of black men is to be black men, and so on, I think this is directly related to their idea of the Atzmut Ein Sof as being a one that is constituted by Ribui. However, he doesn't ever fully disclose the other side of the story in these contexts. So when he writes in that letter, that notion that we all come from one Adam, that is somewhat disingenuous to another side of his understanding, that atem kruyim adam ve'enu moto olam kruyim adam. He also upholds that teaching, right? So I know people hate me for constantly saying this, and I hate myself for constantly having to say it, but it needs to be said. Good to see you.
Well, Leore, if Leore doesn't have okay, so well, thank you, Nathaniel. I need to think about this, of course, more. I'll just say, I don't think only the Rebbe would be a bit horrified by this situation of mixing. I think if you speak about the Zohar, I think the book Tikkunei Zohar, for him, the image of mixing is a very negative image. It's the Erev Rav. Asaf Tamari has a nice article. He chases the whole history of this, and I think there are contemporary responses, semi-contemporary responses to the mixing. Of course, not to America, more to things in Israel. For instance, somebody like Israel Eliyahu Weintraub, that for him, basically, almost anybody outside Kolel Chazon Ish or Erev Rav. So for him, of course, for him, the Erev Rav is the Cook Circle, is the Mizrahi, that they want to mix Torah and nationalism and so on and so forth.
I agree with the comments before me. I see in the Zohar the talk about the 70 Sarim, the angels that are essential entities to signify the essential difference between the different nations. And there are interesting intermingling through the Pilegesh and concubine that I go back to Rabbi Yosef Abba-Mishan. He speaks about the concubine and the way that the Gentile seeds go into Israel through Ruth and other mothers, and he sees a redemption through this. But doesn't collapse, or it's more if swallows the Gentiles in Israel more than respects the otherness as a pure entity, because these entities are always demonized, and I don't need to tell you, you're an expert about the demonizing of the other in these traditions. So I would say that modern mystical social leaders have a very problematic traditions to work with, and to ascend beyond them into a postmodern society is a very big challenge, and I'm not sure there are yet leaders that are able to reconcile between, and I think what Social Vision attempts to do is they say maybe we shouldn't reconcile, maybe there's a different ethos that we have that is different than this universalism. But as a modern Orthodox Jew, I think for me it's not easy, and here I prefer the more safe base as a scholar, just talking about what they think and not what my personal opinions are.
Okay, Jonah, do you want to hop in? Because we're reached the end of our session.
Cool, thank you. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for that great question, Professor Berman. I think this got to an amazing ending, because this is actually going to be the topic of the next panel starting at 3. It's going to be exploring the Rebbe. It's between the Rebbe universal and particular. So please come back into the Zoom room in half an hour, go bathroom break and get a snack, because we have another hour. Great.
There are people that still have questions. Maybe we could extend a little the question and answer time.
After the next session, there's going to be some time people can rejoin the room and hang out. But just give people a break. Everyone can leave now, and those people can maybe ask a question while we wait for the next session to start. But just for everyone, this is the official end of the session, and we'll stop streaming now, and then we'll give people room to ask questions now, and also know that later in the evening or wherever your time zone is, after the next session, we'll have time for people to schmooze and talk. So thank you so much for coming to the session. And yeah, I can, everyone is officially dismissed or whatever, but we can finish up with these last few questions.
Okay.
I'll bring in, oh, I am not a co-host. So Denise, can you bring in Larry Schiffman? Oh, now I'm a co-host. Excellent, thank you. Here, this should be, I think we only have about like 10 minutes before we have to prepare for the next one. But I do want to get these questions in as well. So I think Professor Schiffman should be coming into our room right now. May take a second. There we go.
Second. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
now we can see you.
Okay, so you know what the trick is with all this? You see everybody's books, whatever books are behind them. So, okay, I want to thank everybody for these presentations. And there's a part of this that overlaps with what I'm going to be saying in the 3 o'clock session. But I wanted to make one point that I think is very important in all this discussion. And that is that every single form of Judaism that exists up until today from ancient times has to deal with the tension of this issue of particularism versus universalism. And in fact, it starts in the Tanakh and it runs in Chazal and everything else. And the truth is that I think to a great extent, what you're getting in the Rebbe's presentation of this, and I had the advantage of rereading Elliot's material on this just 2 days ago, what you think that you're getting to a great extent is the Kabbalistic / Hasidic reflection of this issue. Now, sometimes it sounds more blunt and less pleasant than in some other sources, but the reality is it's not all that different. And how can you see that? You see that the minute you hit the halachic sphere, because nobody talked about one word so far here in this whole thing about halacha, and talking about the Rebbe without halacha is like talking about guf b'li neshama. Or maybe we should say neshama b'li guf, we should say. So at any rate, what's going on here is that if you'll take the case of shluchim in Africa helping non-Jews, this is just a very simple halachic thing. It's a halacha that Jews are supposed to help. Aniyeu mota olam. It's a halacha. Why is it a halacha? Because of exactly, Elliot quoted the stuff before. Elliot, you shouldn't say people should hate you for this, because you didn't say it in a way which is not right. It's fine. It's right. And the reality is this is what's in the material. And I think that the problem is it's in a certain tension with other requirements of the halachic system. And the halachic system defines all human beings as one at the same time as defining Jews as different, separate, or in some ways on a higher level, as you see in the Kabbalistic Hasidic sources. So, but this is the Am Segula and all this stuff. So what I'm simply saying here is that I think we sometimes have a problem of acting as if something in Chabad is unique to Chabad. That's just plain Judaism. And this happens very often, and it's something which has to be guarded against in our work. And so I also caution again in this particular case that we need to remember the halachic framework, and the halachic framework provides a certain set of lines of how much you differentiate and how much you don't differentiate and where you differentiate. And I think that that's a very important point. That's why Elliot's point about the Rebbe not liking this kind of mixed identity scenario is right. But again, this is all based on things like shatnez, kilayim. There's a whole halachic principle of keeping things separate from other things. But we have to remember this hilchot tarovet.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Larry. But the only somewhat of a defense, we had to respond to a book, about Chabad. But you're absolutely right to broaden the canvas. And I think if I could say what you said in the paradoxical language that I like to use.
I love that. I love that.
It's always been the case that the sense of Israel's election is predicated on an exclusiveness that is inclusive of its own others. That's the paradox. And you're right that looking to halacha is actually a very important dimension of this.
I'll add one more defense. I think the term ritual, I mean, it's a general term, it's an academic term, but I think it overlaps with halacha. I don't think it exhausts halacha, but it overlaps with it. And the Rav Kook's book, Chavash Pere, I mean, there are a few pages there which are sort of Kabbalistic, but it's 90% of it is a defense of Vilna Gaon's halachic position on moving the head feeling upwards rather than downwards. Yeah, so, okay.
By the way, one big example of taking something which is just plain Judaism is this whole business about reciprocity. This also sounds like Rabbi Soloveitchik's, confidential community, but like Boker Tov. I mean, if you just read any of the Jewish sources throughout history. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. Okay, so thanks a lot. I actually do want to take a break before the session.
Good to see you.
I'm going to sign off, and I think I have to come back on the other link that I was given. Is that right, Jonah?
If you come on either link, I can make sure you're a panelist. Yeah.
All
right.
I think we have time for one more question. If you guys have enough time, I think we'll have to make it a little short because I do want like 15 minutes of a break. So let's do a quick question with Kalman Newman. I'm going to promote you to panelist now so we can see and hear you. Might take a second. Wait for it. There we go. We still can't see or hear you, but we see that you're in the room.
Hi. Okay, hi, I'll be short. First, something very short for Professor Garb, if you ever publish it. Rav Kook's, the name of the book is Chavesh Pe'er.
Yeah,
okay?
Of course.
Okay. I just happen to have it here on myself. The second thing is, Larry went off, but it's not, the Rambam and Chabad have different understandings on the difference between Jews and non-Jews, right? Menachem Kellner has written 20 books on that, right? So it's not that this is a common issue, right? Chabad have more of a problem because they believe in an ontological difference, as Professor Wolfson said, right? Because the neshama of a non-Jew is different, and for the Rambam, there's no such issue. So the paradox is greater, the difficulties are greater. Okay, and I'll just end with a short anecdote, which I remembered. It connects two people who we're talking about now. I remember in one of his books, Hugo Bergman describes that he participates regularly in a shiur in Chabad that I believe was the shiur that Rabbi Steinsaltz used to give at the house of Shazar. He said, that's one of the shiurim I go to recently, but the only thing I'm not able to accept there is the constant repetition of the difference between the Jewish soul and the non-Jewish soul, because really Bergman was a type of religious humanist who could not accept that. Okay, thank you very much. I was really...
I would like to comment on your comment, if I may. So Pekaj, between ideology and reality, he distinguishes between the philosophical sources and how they are, when they establish the commitment to social love, they are developing Aristotle ideas, and they're more universal. And he shows how the Hasidism uses and depends on the Kabbalistic traditions that are much more essentialist and differentiate between the essence of the Jewish soul and the Gentiles.
Exactly. Yeah. Precisely. Okay, so thank you very much. It was very, very, very...
I just say you're absolutely right about the Rambam not having the same problems. However, it's interesting that in the Mishnah Torah, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, he says the Re'ah is the Jew, the Rambam.
The only source that I'm aware of that includes non-Jews in V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha is Sharei Kedusha of
Yeah, but my point is that this is important for the Rebbe because he follows the Rambam on this. But you're right. When you look at it from a more total picture, the Rambam doesn't have any of the problems that we're discussing. I agree with you. Yeah.
This is such a fascinating conversation. I wish we could have it all day, but we do have to stop now.
Thank you very much for letting
Again, later this evening or after the next session, we'll have another Zoom room that everyone can schmooze in for a little bit. But for now, we'll have to.
Thank you very much.
Thank our panelists so much for joining us and for taking the time, and I loved hearing you guys talk. So and I guess we're off Facebook now, but everyone who's joined us to view, thank you so much too.
Thank you, John.
I'll leave the session open.
Yeah, I think so.
So there's people still that I think are going to stay on, the attendees.
Yeah.
So we'll just leave it open for now.
And I guess Larry will join us. And here, Marcia, Brennan is here. Marcia, I'm going to make you a panelist now. I don't know if you're sitting in front of your computer and can hear me, but you'll be a panelist for the next. So you're going to pop in now, I believe. Should. And I need to pull up something. I guess I'm the only one people are seeing right now. It's a lot of pressure. Pull this up. Don't know where Marshall Brennan is. Okay. Hey, Marcia, how's it going?
Can you hear?
Oh, no, you just muted yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I had to hop off and hop back on again, but I think the connection looks good.
Okay, cool. And for yours, I will share my screen for your poster.
Thank you so much for that. It's just the one image. I actually have it up, but I'd prefer not to be fiddling with the technology. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. And it's just the one of the cover of the book.
That's it.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. Yeah. Very interesting conference.
Thanks. Yeah, it's turning out to be cool.
It'll be really interesting. I'll be interested to hear people to the extent to which the conversation that precedes ours informs ours.
Yeah.
I know that Professor Schiffman was making some comments. I had to step away briefly, but was he making that tie kind of explicitly between one session and the next?
Kind of, yeah. He started and said, I'll continue this, in my talk. I'm very interested to see, how they relate to each other. When I actually I couldn't make the beginning of the session because I had a class, so I jumped on at the end and I heard what they were talking about, and I was like, this is a perfect transition to the next panel. So I'm excited for that.
Well, it's interesting too, because when I was putting together my paper, I contemplated this relationship between the particular and the universal in a slightly different way. And so I'll be curious to see too how my contribution, because really I'm an art historian, right? So this has to do with visual culture, contextualization, and the limits of interpretation in a lot of ways. And so this conference so far, Jonah, this is my reading on this, is very much engaging in the kind of parameters of interpretation around textual, historical, and other kinds of understandings. And so to add the visual element in this way, I'll just be very curious to see what people want to do with this.
Yeah, me too. I think it'll be, and you're going to speak first in this panel. Okay. So I think it'll be a cool grounding for the rest of the panel, to come out of, the last panel was very kind of up here, and then to bring it down to the visual and grounding the next panel in that, I think will be super cool.
Yeah, and just what's striking to me within these conversations is what is indeed at stake within this notion of universalism, right? What is it that's being glorified, and what is it that's being potentially questioned, if not threatened? And so I'm very, very curious about the parameters that are being established here, a little bit polemically even, around this concept of the relation between the particular and the universal. So we'll see how that inflects whatever is coming, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, just even listening to you contemplate it is exciting me. So I'm very
You're
excited.
too kind. You've been so kind through everything, Jonah. I will thank you publicly, but let me take this moment to thank you privately. You've been just wonderful as an organizer, and just your immediacy and response, your kindness, just up and down. Thank you for everything.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yes, yes.
All right, back in a second, remember?
So you're a student now, Jonah? Where are you studying?
So I just graduated from Oberlin College in May, and I'm starting at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, like right now. I actually, it was not a great, this week and the next week are kind of insane for me. The reason I couldn't make last session is because I was in class. My classes started this week, so I am running around a bit.
Well, you are very much in class right now too, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So are you there for a PhD, or what degree are you
I'm
working?
going for an MA in Jewish studies, and I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to go to the PhD route, but I'm not sure where. Rabbinical school is definitely one of my thought processes, but
Good.
there's a lot of different places I can go with that.
Yeah, and so I hear that there's still openness in your thinking, and right, regarding where the paths will take you and how the philosophy will inflect. So, well, all the best of luck with this.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Phil is very lucky to have you as his TA, research assistant, however you describe this role, this assistantship. Right. So, yes.
Professor Schiffman, should I be calling you Lawrence, Larry, Professor Schiffman?
No one calls me Lawrence.
Okay.
Except for some dental assistant.
Okay.
Reading a card, right? You can call me by my first name if you want.
Okay.
Well, it's very nice to meet you.
Play with the light here. I think it's too much light.
I'm just gonna see if there's any last minute things I need to do on the emails.
We have another person joining us too, right, Jonah?
Yes, Daniel Reiser will be joining us.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can lengthen our talks again. I can't wait to find out if this picture is a real picture or a fake picture.
Oh, as far as I know, it's a real picture. It's archivally. It's, yeah, documentary photography. Yeah.
That's amazing. There were so many of these people standing behind them.
Yep, there's a story there, actually. So what?
Oh, we're going to talk about that. I hope that's your talk. Right?
Hey, I'm giving a talk about this, exactly.
Great, that's what I want to know. I was, yeah.
No, and that's why what the photo does is it gives us the opportunity to be both contextual and interpretive, right? And so that's part of the benefit of the photo. Yeah.
I'm gonna run and grab some water. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Anyone want any water?
I keep water in front of on my desk all the time now.
I do that too. I actually have multiple cups of tea going here, so you can see my tea bag kind of dangling from the side, but the essential fluids here. So are you teaching remotely, Professor Schiffman? You're muted right now? I can't hear you.
Now?
Yeah, you're fine now.
I am teaching remotely. I don't have any choice because I'm the over 65 group. We're not allowed to go to the campus even if we want to. They told us, we don't want you, which I don't mind because it's great. You know how much research I'm getting done? You know, it's kind of really strange. You know, it really is. Many years ago, we had a session on how to finish your doctorate. And I told students that sometimes you have to make a limit also on family visits. And I always said on Sunday, I'm willing to go to a visit for one mealtime. Don't ask me to come at 10 o'clock and stay till 7 o'clock. I'm not doing that because I have to do my work. Well, anyhow, here the joke is that our children and grandchildren barely see us because now we're afraid that the grandchildren get it in school and bring it home, you know, this kind of thing. So they barely see us. They come to the backyard. How long can you sit in the backyard? Maybe get a pizza or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we never go there. So the bottom line is I'm getting enormous amounts of work done.
No, me too. My husband is 62, so we're being super careful, and so I haven't been onto my campus since March, and I'm getting a lot of work done too, but I do miss the community. I have to tell you, I really do miss it.
Said that, it's worse that it don't go anywhere. It's clean the house. My wife works from home too, and but it is a very funny experience not being with people and seeing people. And a few people on the street that we see come by, walk back and forth. But it's very strange experience. But for getting research done, it's kind of amazing, right? It really is. It's strange.
I think that people who themselves may not be scholars might not understand just how completely immersive the writing and the research and the writing are. I mean, it is another world. It can be like a fugue state even. And if we're in that state, right, I mean, this is a very conducive situation.
Sad way, obviously, it's not something, it's not how we would want to be able to advance our research, but
I know.
It is very strange. I mean, because we commute. My wife and I both commute to New York. Now, commuting from here, hi Menachem, you want to say hi? Okay. So if we commute, that's like basically close to 3 hours a day, right? We live in Long Island, and so that's all gone. This is not to mention money. We are saving so much money. I can't believe it. I said to my wife a very funny thing. I said, we can determine in these months what we would need to live on if we were retired. Because you take away the commuting, you take away cleaning bills for work and all that kind of stuff, and you see what it's like if you're not. A really strange experience. Yeah. Hi, how are you? Here's a muted man trying to say hello. Yeah.
Doing well.
Okay.
Being late at night.
Well, you're up at late. It's 5 to 10 in Israel, right?
Yep, it's almost 10 o'clock. So
I heard your question
to Elliot Wolfson, but I had to put kids to sleep, so I went back and forth. I didn't hear when did the last discussion end?
We went till about 45.
So I missed only 5 minutes. I went up to 40.
Wasn't too bad. Thank you so much for staying up for us. Really appreciate it.
No, these are the hours that just wake up. I started working these hours. After okay. To sleep. That's the time I can see them rise. That's the climax of the day.
Okay.
We have students now that could be getting up, at 6 a.m. to be on class in China, something like that. The people taking classes all online from all over the world now instead of being in New York. It's really strange.
It's a social vision.
Yeah.
I'm actually in school right now in California, but I'm in New York. So that works well for me. So I don't have to wake up early. My morning classes are in the afternoon.
Okay, if I want to share a screen, I'll just check it. I see it works. Here, we have it. That's my screen when I have to.
Perfect.
I just wanted to check that everything works. I'm trying to enlarge it here and see when I press buttons. You see everything, Jonah?
Yeah.
You're not okay. Okay.
It's very funny why you can't, if you press a slideshow, and then try to share, it doesn't work. You can only share if you haven't pressed slideshow. I don't understand that at all. At least that's what
I press just screen share and I put it on my desktop and then I double click it and that's all. I don't see it's open. I see it's open twice even.
Yeah, I found it to be glitchy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so that unpredictability has made me a little bit antsy, which is why Jonah's going to help me with the technical part.
And Larry, you don't have do you have something to share?
Yeah, he made a
you have
yes.
Okay, will you share that or do you want me to share that from my screen?
No, I do it. It's no problem.
Okay, cool.
Because I want to control it. I want to move it. Here, let me see. The only question is, let me get back. I was running this thing on a small picture. There we go. So now here's the share screen. And in 1 second, you should see me. Let's see. Do you see me?
1 second. Now I see the Rebbe launches.
Now you see the screen. Now I press slideshow, because that's the problem, because you got to press slideshow afterwards for some crazy reason. And now you should really be in business, right?
Yeah, so I do it a different way. On the bottom, you have this picture on the bottom. I'll show you. I do it a different way, but I learned from you now. On the bottom, there's here, it says slideshow instead of at the top. I go here. There are different ways of seeing it. Slideshow, and I press that button. Here it becomes big.
Here's the funny part. I just unshared, and now there we go. Yeah, you're down here where it's the same thing. You press that button. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Just before we start, I just want to, Daniel, you have are you zooming in from two different things?
Who, me? No.
Yeah, I have two of you on my screen, one without video.
I have no idea. There was if someone is using the same link, it will come on my name?
No, you signed
maybe.
I'll tell you why. There's a professor who signed up, Kraus, who told me I signed up. I didn't get a link. I want to hear you. He wrote about Chabad. He's a specialist about Chabad. And I gave him the link, and after I gave the link, I saw that you wrote everyone that's a personal link. You should not give it to anyone.
No worries. I will. I'll just put this person as an attendee, and they can still observe and be doing it under your name.
Okay, Yitzhak Kraus. I suppose he hears us.
Okay, we're ready to go live. Just right before we do that, I just want to say the order is going to be, the order of people will be Marcia, and then Larry, and then Daniel, and then we'll have moderated conversation. I'm your moderator, so I'm very excited for this panel. Yeah, I think if everyone feels comfortable, we'll start sharing. We won't start for another few minutes to give people time to come in, but we can start sharing this on Facebook.
And we don't see them. We were not seen in the last session.
Yeah, no one else.
You're the only one who knows the number of people and their names.
Yeah, exactly. What was that, Larry? Oh, sorry, your audio just cut out for a little bit.
I'll just close my WhatsApp.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
There's some background noise.
Yeah, we had that problem last time we met all together. It has to be the internet.
Going over here. Okay, I'm going to do the test.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Fine.
Okay, now testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Earphones too.
Okay.
Best to
I'm glad we
be
did
on
that
mute.
before we. Sorry, what was that, Denise?
I'm saying best to be on mute if you're not talking.
Okay. So, thanks for that. We have 10 people. Oh, Nathaniel Berman's coming back, so I'm going to put him as an attendee. If people might jump in, we'll just make sure everyone's where they're supposed to be. Denise, I think we can go to live stream, and we'll still give it. Okay, now we are live on Facebook. Hello, Facebook. Let me also I want to share this on Facebook as well. If anyone else wants to share it on Facebook, please feel free. Oh, there we are. Now I'm sharing us. It's strange. I can see me and and we're on Facebook. Okay. We'll give it a minute or two just to make sure people have time to get here. And then we'll get started. But for anyone who is seeing us now, welcome to the third panel of the Social Vision Conferences. This will be the last one for today. This panel is called the Lubavitcher Rebbe Between the Particular and the Universal. I'm going to put these people back in the attendee space. Cool. Just working out all the kinks. Everyone's coming back in. Let's give it another 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah, okay, people are joining and we're on Facebook. Cool, this is exciting. So after this panel, we will have, I will put in it'll come from Social Vision Conference in the chat, but it'll say another Zoom link for a breakout room that we can all go to afterwards if you want to schmooze and talk and get together. that we'll do that after every evening of the conference. And also, I just wanted to say, if anyone is interested in what they're hearing today, we're going to be having 2 more days of the conference next week on Wednesday and Thursday. And those will also be all-day panels and solo talks of different scholars talking about social vision and the topics contained therein. So I think we have a pretty good amount of people. We can probably get started. Yeah, let's get started. Okay. We're officially starting now. Hello. Welcome to the Social Vision Conference. This is the Lubavitcher Rebbe Between the Particular and Universal panel. I'm going to be moderating. My name is Jonah Gelfand. I am the conference coordinator for the Social Vision Conferences, and I'm also a student at the Graduate Theological Union. I'm very excited for this panel. We have 3 awesome speakers, and yeah, we're going to get right into it. So the first speaker is Marcia Brennan. Marcia Brennan is the Carolyn and Fred McManus Professor of Humanities at Rice University and a Professor of Art History and Religious Studies. And her presentation is called Looking Up by Looking Down, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson and the Paradox of Numinous Realism. And I will share my screen for you. There we go. Can you all see that?
And Jonah, can you go slideshow from beginning, please?
Yes. So we'll do that.
That's it. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Okay. So I would like to thank Philip Wexler for his kind invitation to participate in the conference, Menachem Schmidt and Ellie Rubin for their help with archival information, and of course, Jonah Gelfand for his help with pretty much everything. So many details. I've learned a lot from reading Professor Wexler's book, Social Vision, particularly regarding the practical and social applications of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson's mystical vision. So, by training, I am a modernist art historian. In thinking about what I could offer to this discussion, I've decided to present a close reading of the striking image that appears on the cover of Social Vision, which you see here. Within the pages of the text, Wexler calls for a more complex and inclusive methodological approach than is typically found within traditional disciplinary scholarship. To that end, he develops a hybrid methodological model to account for what he calls Schneerson's theological realism, and that term appears on page 84 of the Wexler text. So I believe that a close reading of the photograph that appears on the book's cover can provide a way to build on this approach, particularly as we consider the aesthetic qualities of the image as displaying a form of numinous realism. So by numinous realism, I mean an artistic representation that references the existential and social domain while simultaneously evoking spiritual or metaphysical associations. In this discussion, I'll examine some of the ways in which the photograph can be seen as expressing a conception of transcendence that is rooted in the social and embodied in ordinary life, and thus how the image may appear as a striking pictorial depiction of Schneerson's mystical social vision. So I'm going to begin now with a close formal analysis of the photograph. Taken on Labor Day, September 5th, 1977, this is not an official photograph. The image was shot by Levi Frieden, who was a regular figure at the Rebbe's headquarters. The photo shows Schneerson about to enter the Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters at 770 Eastern Parkway in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. On various levels, this is a transitional image. Schneerson has just stepped out of the large formal car that has brought him to 770. The vehicle appears in the photograph's middle ground, along with the attendants who accompany him. Behind these figures, a sizable crowd has gathered in the background for the West Indies Labor Day Parade down Kingston Avenue. And here it's really interesting regarding how the different registers of the photograph are functioning concerning, questions of universalism versus particularity, inclusiveness, that which can and cannot be reconciled. I think the photo is a complicated kind of multivalent signifier, and we can talk about that in discussion. Okay, Positioned against this diverse backdrop, Schneerson appears as an austere yet elegant presence, a figure of both simplicity and formality. Within the viewer's sightline, a receding diagonal can be traced from the singular figure of the Rebbe in the foreground to the associates directly behind him, to the panoramic view of the crowd that has assembled on the opposite side of the street. Surrounded by so many others, Schneerson appears as a singular figure who is set apart from his surroundings, even as he is of a piece with them. Okay, so it's complicated. Again, you can hear the multiplicity and the resonance in my remarks so far. As is consistent with the paradigmatic model of the Hasidic tzaddik, Schneerson is among the people, yet in important ways, he remains completely alone. Even as he is about to enter the building, at the actual moment when the photograph was taken, Schneerson remains poised on the sidewalk outside. Literally, he stands at the center of a circle that appears as part of the stylized geometric pattern incised on the concrete sidewalk outside of the Chabad headquarters. Standing on this classicized white ground, Schneerson is thus positioned at the center of a circle, even as he is imminently about to step outside of its boundaries. You can hear both the literal and the metaphorical emphases in the remarks that I'm putting forth here, right? You can hear that kind of dual resonance. So extending these literal and metaphorical associations. In the photograph, Schneerson simultaneously appears in an upstanding posture, just as he is actively walking forward. And here I'll just reference page 220 of the Wexler text. And say that this doubling suggests both a progressive stance and a position of rectitude. And I'll also note that in a literal sense, anyone who visits the building today can walk the same pathway that the Rebbe walked when this photograph was taken. Resonating with these complex spatial elements is a complementary sense of temporal complexity. Just as the photograph was taken at a particular moment in time, it shows Schneerson suspended in that instant, even as he is imminently engaged in moving beyond the confines and, quote unquote, stepping beyond the present. Okay. In aesthetic terms, this evokes the realistic and the numinous, as it conveys a complex sense of presence that is both fixed and unfixed in its inherent multiplicity of associations. Resonating with central themes in Judaism is the idea that when human beings engage certain texts and practices, there is a sense that time is talking to timelessness. I would suggest that perhaps we are witnessing a version of this idea in the photograph as well. Given the interplay of these themes, we might well ask what it can mean to read the photograph as exemplifying the aesthetic qualities of mystical social experience. One way to approach this question is to consider how the image can be seen as depicting the sacralization of the mundane world. In part, the photograph is powerful because it shows the ways in which the iconic becomes enworlded, both physically and socially. Thus, on one level, the scene could not be more candid, anecdotal, or mundane. Yet, even as the photograph records the everyday elements of life itself, the existential appears to be symbolic. The photograph was shot in black and white, and it features a subtle range of monochromatic tonal gradations. Thus, the formal qualities of the image appear to be both documentary and classicizing. Again, it's in the play of multiplicity that we find something very, very interesting. These pictorial elements further endow the scene with a sense of realism and abstractedness, and with it, a sense of historical timeliness and enduring timelessness. In these ways, the formal and iconographic qualities of the photograph can be seen as uniting the quotidian with the transcendent. Okay, so then I think we can start to ask about how we can consider the relations between these themes and issues of technology and the translation of mystical presence. So further extending these associations of materiality and transcendence, the technology of photography itself renders the medium both etheric and grounded in its associations. Here, it's worth remembering that Schneerson graduated as a mechanical and an electrical engineer in pre-war Paris. In addition to holding extensive technical discussions with practicing engineers, Schneerson utilized broadcast media and satellite technology to disseminate his teachings around the world. As he noted, this process entailed a form of transmutation in which the domain of the real became translated into the subtle and the etheric, that is, into a complex network of electrical signals that were processed and transmitted through modern information technology before the imagery recrystallized as televised communications appearing on the screens of their viewers. Yet in this discussion, I'm concerned with a photograph, and photography is literally writing in light. Photo denotes light, while graph relates to graphine, which means to write or to diagram. Thus, this photograph that we're looking at is literally a historical transmission that is written in light. Both the social reality and the material medium associated with film provide effective means for realizing these processes of transmission and iconicity. And as we enter into questions concerning the relations between the empirical and the visionary, we encounter a scene of doubling, of mysteries and revelations, of hiddenness and disclosure. So I will conclude by returning to one of Schneerson's central themes, namely the idea that the social and the spiritual realms cannot be bifurcated. This brings me to a final observation concerning one of the most significant aspects of the photograph. Namely, just as the Rebbe is about to enter the Chabad headquarters, his eyes are cast down. On the one hand, this may reflect nothing more than a common social practice within Orthodox communities regarding inverting the gaze for the sake of both focus and modesty. Or this gesture can be read in very practical terms, as Schneerson's being cautious and reserved in his gait, thus reflecting an older person's proclivity for looking down as they walk. Yet I believe that the Rebbe's inverted gaze can be interpreted in symbolic terms as well. In Social Vision, Wexler notes the ways in which ascent and descent are seen as simultaneous propositions in Schneerson's mystical social philosophy. Here, page 112. Given the Rebbe's emphasis on the reciprocity between the physical and the spiritual domains, I propose that the photograph can be seen in analogous terms as well, and thus as a visual model of numinous realism. Once again, the perspective of the photograph is significant. In this image, the Rebbe appears to be gazing down at the ground as he strides forward. Just as his mystical social teachings emphasize the paradoxical theme of descent for the sake of ascent, Schneerson can be seen as looking up by looking down, contemplating the heavens while gazing down at the ground before him. Such a conception of numinous realism evokes a sense of mystical humanism that speaks in part to an individual's ability to occupy multiple locations simultaneously. In Social Vision, Wexler observes that the Rebbe's leadership is hierarchical and that it communicates the infinite to the people, yet it is also lateral as sacred teachings are translated into the lived practices of the social domain. In all cases, we encounter paradoxes of multiplicity that connote the ability to occupy multiple locations at once. As is consistent with the notion of the Hasidic Rebbe, both spiritually and existentially, Schneerson lived in multiple worlds at once. And these intriguing qualities are reflected in the formal and iconographic structures of the photograph. With his downcast eyes and his forward movement, the photo can be seen as a visible display of the veiled modesty of Schneerson's focused and expansive mystical social vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I'm gonna stop sharing, okay? And thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I'm very excited. Oh, I'm still sharing on my screen. Okay, I was still on PowerPoint. I'm excited to hear how that relates to the next session. Larry Schiffman will be next. Professor Larry Schiffman is the Judge Abraham Lieberman Professor of Hebrew and Judaic Studies at New York University and the Director of the Global Institute for Advanced Research in Jewish Studies. Please join me in welcoming Larry Schiffman.
Okay, thank you. Everybody can see, I hope can see the PowerPoint because I can see it. So let's get started here. I want to begin with a funny story. But the funny story is that I was on some radio program once where they were talking about the Rebbe. And somebody asked the following question. They said, how is it possible to accept the honesty of the campaign regarding the 7 commandments for non-Jews? And how is it possible to accept the concern for American society in light of some quotations in the Tanya, which have a rather negative view about non-Jews? And this is an issue that came up directly in the last session. There was quite a bit of discussion. I don't want to go over all of that material, but I need to point out here that very early in the Rebbe's career, he made a note in which he commented regarding this Tanya passage that it does not describe those who are of the Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, the pious of the nations of the world, because none of this has anything to do with them. And of course, if you observe the 7 commandments, as he noted in that note, a person who observes those commandments is himself considered not to be counted in the negative views which are presented in that particular passage of non-Jews. Now, this morning we heard earlier this afternoon, we heard some discussion, especially from Professor Elliot Wolfson, based on his work, having gone through massively all of the work of the Rebbe. And there you get a very balanced picture of the simultaneous presence of, on the one hand, a traditional, you might call it Hasidic and Kabbalistic view of the role of the Jew, the special role of the Jew, the special status of the Jew when compared to the non-Jews, coupled with the place for non-Jews in the expectation of redemption, which is what the situation is in terms of the idea of working with the 7 nations and trying the 7 commandments and trying to encourage those. Yet at the same time, we need to compare that point of view to some extent with the Pauline approach, in which the idea was to allow those who aren't Jewish, not circumcised, not converted, to somehow or another become a part of the new Israel, which would be the Israel of the end of days, which eventually got shifted to the idea that Jews weren't part of it, but apparently in Paul's original view, the Jews were still part of it, and the idea was to add these Gentiles to the wider Israel. Whereas what we have to a great extent with the Rebbe is the Jews maintain their special status, but the non-Jews may be added to it. And this is an issue that runs through the book, because the book doesn't really deal with some of these issues. And I know we're going to hear in the next talk some other things related to this, and I don't want to accidentally get into those, but especially since I had the privilege of reading the talk in advance. But what I do want to say here is that what shadows over the book is the limiting of the discussion to a certain select body of the Rebbe's material, and not dealing with the fact that it has to be contextualized with the rest. And a similar issue that comes out in all of these matters is what the halachic Jewish law positions are on all of these matters. Now, I want to get now into a number of places, no longer speaking about the Kabbalistic side so much as speaking about some of the historical things that we've been seeing going on. And that is in terms of the fact that one of the things that we have to realize about Chabad in general, there's a book about Chabad, which is written by Rachel Elior, and it's called The Paradoxical Ascent to God. There are a lot of paradoxes accepted in Chabad. So one of them is certainly not only in Chabad, but in Judaism as a whole, the universalistic with the particularistic, and we're hearing that in various directions here. But I want to point out that to a great extent, the ability to deal with these things together was for the Rebbe and for Chabad, certainly in modern times, and for that matter, apparently for all Orthodox Jews, as you can see. It's all tempered by the total change in the non-Jewish people with whom we deal. Now, I know anti-Semitism is rising to some extent in the United States, but most of us have probably never seen an anti-Semitic act. And the reality of the situation is, or experienced it. Now, the reality of the situation is that what we confront is a very different attitude on the part of non-Jews to us. And that fact has made a very big difference, not in the theoretical aspect, as you see when you actually read the Rebbe's works, but in the practical way in which the Rebbe related to non-Jews as the Jewish community as a whole and its relationship to non-Jews, which is simply very different than in the day when my mother, Aliyah Shalom, who grew up in the United States, her mother was born in America, but she remembered the signs for job advertisements in what used to be called the 5 and 10 or the 5 and dime, right, which doesn't exist anymore, I think, but they used to say, no Jews need apply. And she remembered seeing that as a kid in this country. So the reality of the situation is that that has a great effect on the attitude that we're going to see here. But the paradoxes are all over Chabad anyhow, so this one wouldn't be a problem. And one of those paradoxes is that you have a very strong in-group that seeks to work with an out-group. And in a certain sense, that's very similar to the way the Rebbe saw the Jews vis-a-vis the non-Jews in preparing for redemption. Yet we do need to remember a very important fact, that one of the Rebbe's unsuccessful activities was the attempt to deal with the Mihu Yehudi, who is a Jew issue. If you don't realize it, this guy's asking people, are they Jewish, by the way? That's why you're seeing this picture, just like the last one. At any rate, the fact of the matter is that the who is a Jew issue in Israel, where the Rebbe wanted the law change to say that you're only a Jew if you converted according to Jewish law, and he never succeeded. And this is a very important area to emphasize to some extent, because it's a halakhic issue. It's a mystical issue that we don't have enough time to talk about here, right? And the campaign didn't work. And of course, in the United States, we continue to have the same problem of the porous boundaries. Now, they were always to some extent porous, but it's just that now they became infinitely more porous than they ever were before. And we actually know that as a fact because of the historical genetics research that has been done recently. But this is an area that was very important to the Rebbe and needs to be emphasized when we talk about the Rebbe's outreach beyond the Jewish community. But having said that, none of that was in any way could interfere with, oh, here we see the beautiful mikveh that I was supposed to show you when talking about who is a Jew. Sorry. Believe it or not, this is a modern mikveh. It's a very beautiful thing. It shows what can be done by people who know how to imitate the classic ways. But now, the point that we want to talk about now is the children of Noah, the campaign to get the 7 commandments observed by non-Jews. Now, this actually has 2 different aspects. One of them is the aspect of private activity, simply trying to convince non-Jews, but the other, these public events in which the idea was that if non-Jews could get gotten to observe the 7 Noahide commandments, which actually so many of our neighbors do, then this would be another path to bringing about redemption, because the constant improvement of society would lead to the true tikkun olam. Now, I also want to point out in this respect that the campaign, right, again, was not a very great success. But nonetheless, the ideology of the 7 commandments was constantly in and behind various of the Rebbe's dealings with the United States government in the attempt to get the United States government to represent a position which would be a kind of spiritual position. I have to say also that when we move into the area, right, of public menorah lightings, so here we are talking about something in which it was stated that the light of the menorah and the symbolism could, that's Brandenburg Gate, in case anyone doesn't know, could spread as well to the non-Jewish community, that by seeing it. But I think the truth is that forget that ideology. Every Jewish kid who walked around during the winter season would see the Christmas trees and Christmas decorations in every store in anywhere he went. And what the Rebbe wanted to do was to give them the pride in being Jewish, just like the people who campaigned that they should at least sing some Hanukkah songs in public school. So here's time for a funny story. A Christian colleague who was in Israel on sabbatical for a year, had a son in Israeli school, and he learned Hebrew in a nursery school. He came home when he was in kindergarten, and the teacher starts singing a Hebrew song for Hanukkah without knowing what it means. The kid says, I can translate that, translates the song. right? And the teacher calls up the parents and says, how could this kid know Hebrew? This kid, his last name, a typical not Jewish name. So anyhow, you see, that's the, I'm not going to say only in America, as the joke goes, but it's only in Israel. This is the new world in which we live, in which the Rebbe could speak about the light of Hanukkah, not simply reaching those Jewish kids, but reaching as well the non-Jews. By the way, to show you the impact of the Rebbe's ideas, I saw something fantastic in a shopping mall in Israel. I saw a bunch of kids, whatever they are, from a Jewish youth group, dressed up as Maccabees, run around, gather 200 kids during Hanukkah in the Tel Aviv Mall, in Tzfon Tel Aviv, where they claim everybody's a secularist, but it's not true, of course. And he gathered 200 kids. They gathered the 200 kids and their parents, but they're literally 200. It was enormous. And light the menorah together, and everybody singing Hanukkah songs. It's a very beautiful thing. And this is the Rebbe's idea of lighting the menorah that way. But I think despite all the talk, it mostly was aimed at Jews. Now, the next area I want to discuss, because I'm trying to keep to the time over here, is the area of government relations. Now, in government relations, actually, the Rebbe and Chabad were very, very successful. Part of it is what they call in Hebrew shtadlanut, in Yiddishized Hebrew shtadlanus, trying to convince the government to do what we want. And of course, Israel was one of the big areas, just as all of the other organizations that Chabad worked with, all the other organizations. We had some years ago a rally in DC at the height of the Second Intifada, organized by 3 organizations: Chabad, the Reform Action Center, and the Federation. Nobody batted an eyelash about working together to bring 200,000 Jews to Washington, D.C. But anyhow, I want to point out here that in the government relations aspect, and this is a very important point, the Rebbe advocated positions that were for the good of the country as a whole. Now, I want to say, I don't think this contradicts anything about the view of non-Jews being sort of secondary when compared to Jews, because that's irrespective. We are commanded by halakha to be concerned about the welfare of non-Jews as well as Jews. We are commanded to be concerned about the welfare of the state in which we live. And as good citizens, advocating as he did, for example, for the founding of a separate education department, which took place under President Carter at the Rebbe's recommendation in 1979, and constant correspondence with Carter and Reagan, and all of this, right, was half advocacy for us and half advocacy for the idea of trying to create a moral, religious America. Now, I said this was successful. It was politically successful. The Rebbe's vision of trying to improve the moral state of America through government action and through school prayer, despite what he said about it, did not basically jibe with the American Constitution as it was interpreted by the courts. For this reason, he didn't get the school prayer, he didn't get the moment of silence that he wanted, and the truth is, the government never became an advocate of morality as he saw it, and ethics as he saw it, and as this book discusses. This is maybe a sad thing, because some of the breakup of what we see going on in our country right now may be traced in many ways, certainly people shooting people over their political views, to lack of the kind of ethics, to lack of understanding why the 10 Commandments maybe should be on the wall, should not be taken down from the court wall, and things like this. But the Rebbe's position was much closer to the position of the evangelicals than to the rest of the Jewish community and to the courts, and it did not, in fact, happen, despite the fact that he was treated with great respect and that those presidents wrote back and forth with him. Another quick story, because I'm close to the end of my talk. I met a Hasidic Rebbe with a much smaller group than the Lubavitcher Rebbe on an airplane once coming from a certain city, I don't want to say, and this Rebbe who lived in that city, we were talking on the plane, and he told me what he was coming to New York for. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was advocating prayer in the public schools, and he was coming to a meeting of Aguda to decide what they should do to fight this, because, as he said, we have kids in public school. And the Rebbe's point of view was that everybody should have a non-denominational prayer, but non-denominational prayers usually meant Christian prayers, and really people who lived outside of the orbit of Crown Heights understood that this was really not a good idea for the Jewish community. But this was an area where the Rebbe didn't win, despite the fact that the book pictures his ideology about the society as a whole. I think I tend to agree with the Rebbe and the book, but that has nothing to do with the reality that it didn't happen. Now, we want to just jump to two more things. One is the Gulf War. Here's prayer in the schools. Okay, sorry. I want to jump to the Gulf War. The Rebbe saw the Gulf War as a step toward redemption. And the reason the Rebbe saw this is because he saw the United States as victorious in the Gulf War. Now, I don't want to get into an evaluation of the Gulf War, but I do want to make the following point. What the Rebbe thought was miraculous, and looks in retrospect that this part is true, was the bringing together of the nations of the world to fight something which was unjust, namely the invasion of Kuwait. Now, we now know today how important it was to reverse from a point of view of geopolitical scenario, and as we see now after the UAE agreement, how important it was to keep Iraq out of the Persian Gulf. However, the reality of the situation was for him not that part of it, but the part of it that the nations of the world came together and to create an alliance to fight injustice. Never mind that the Jews were left out, that Israel couldn't be there because the Saudis wouldn't join. Despite that fact, the Rebbe saw this as a miraculous aspect of the world coming together for a moral purpose. And of course, for him, this was also a sign of oncoming redemption. I want to finish with one last topic, and that is interfaith dialogue. Now, the Rebbe, I won't tell you who that person is, by the way, on the left. The Rebbe was of the opinion when Nostra Aetate came out, the beginning actually in 1963, but earlier than that in the 60s, when the Vatican began to shift its attitude, he was of the opinion, as was Rav Moshe Feinstein, that this was an attempt to convert the Jews. This is because these were Europeans who couldn't believe that a non-Jew would ever reach out to a Jew in any other way. And we could understand why they believed that. At that time, Abraham Joshua Heschel was fighting for making this happen. And Rabbi Soloveitchik took the position with Heschel initially that it was wrong, against Heschel, that it was wrong, but Heschel used him as a posek, asking him all of his questions when he went to the Vatican, and Rabbi Soloveitchik told him, I'll answer your questions, but I'm going to condemn it when you're finished. Anyhow, Heschel and a variety of Jews who had converted to Catholicism sold the idea to the Vatican, and in 1963 they issued a statement radically changing their attitude to Jews and Judaism. The Rebbe and Rav Moshe wrote a letter to Rav Soloveitchik asking him to join them in saying that no Jews should have anything to do with the Catholics and that their position in turning to the Jews should be completely rejected. Rav Soloveitchik did not answer them. Instead, he provided a set of guidelines for the Rabbinical Council of America and the Orthodox Union for how to relate to the Catholics. I have to admit to you that I'm a representative of the Orthodox Union to the committee, right, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations that represents the Jewish community to the Vatican. And it's an international committee for people from Israel, people from the US, people all over. And there are 40-something representatives. I represent the Orthodox Union there. However, the point I want to make is that we do have to remember, with all this reaching out, and with all of this stuff going on, that in a certain sense, the Rebbe was not willing to have the Jewish community intersect with members of the organized groups of the clergy of other religions. He was not against individual relations, but he was against the Jewish community officially having any relations with these groups. Now, in the end, our relations with these groups have, for the most part, turned out to be advantageous to us and especially to Israel. And that's another story for another lecture. But I do point this out because it has to be a balance against some of the other activities of reaching out to non-Jews that the Rebbe was involved with. So I want to sum up by saying that I think that there is a need to balance what's in the book on all of these issues, because we have to consider again the Kabbalistic aspects which form the background, the halachic aspects is like nothing about halakha vis-a-vis the world around us in the book, and we have to avoid, you could say, crediting or blaming Chabad for things that are just plain Judaism, that are described here, like the whole matter of reciprocity, which sounds very much like Rabbi Soloveitchik's work on the covenantal community. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting anything wrong about sharing these values, but these are shared Jewish values expressed in Chabad in the motifs and the language of Hasidic Kabbalah, but they are common Jewish ideas, and we need to bring a little bit more balance to that, and we need to remember as we go along that still the difference between Jews and non-Jews, the nature of Jewish identity was also highlighted by the Rebbe, and so what we have here is, I think, in many ways, a very good position for traditional Judaism, which is the position which I think is pretty much now standard among Orthodox groups in the United States, certainly, which is, on the one hand, to be friendly and open and interact very well with not only the government, but individual non-Jews, and at the same time to remember the distinctions and the Jewish beliefs about the special character of the Jewish people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Larry, I need you just to stop sharing your slides so I can share mine.
Stop sharing, done.
Okay, I'll share mine. And we'll start. Okay, I'll continue balancing. 1 second. Okay. Jonah, may I start?
Yeah, let me just, Daniel Reiser is the chair of the Department of Jewish Thought at Herzog College.
Thank you. Research of Hasidism is usually divided into theological research or historical research, and between them there are bridges and sometimes minds. Social vision is a refresher and gives a new perspective to research. It seems that Hasidism has not yet received extensive sociological aspects using tools from the social sciences. This is without a doubt one of the great contributions of this book. I hope that this is only the beginning and that we will see in the future more research like this one. I would say with a blessing, Yafutzu Mainotecha Chutza. In the second chapter, Wexler and his co-authors show how deeply the Rebbe identified with the historical foundations of the United States of America. The story of the migration of religious groups to the New World, escaping religious persecution, is also the story of Chabad and the personal story of the Rebbe himself, who escaped communism, later on Nazism, and finally found his place in America. The democratic liberal principles and the social commitment of the Western culture captured his heart, although he also recognized in them an overdose of materialism. I believe there is a certain tension in this book. The universal and the Jewish particular are mixed with each other, and the boundaries were not always clear to me. Is the strengthening of Jewish communities in the diaspora and the establishment of 100 of Chabad centers around the world intended to ensure the future of the world, as it appears in the book in the second chapter, or of the Jewish people? Is the American center, is America a center for a global renaissance, or is a creation of a new Jewish life after the Holocaust? Let me present 2 examples. Okay. In the 4th chapter, the authors delve into social principles of the Rebbe's social doctrine. The Rebbe's principle of reciprocity challenges the dichotomy of modern social discourse. Okay, and I'm quoting from the book from page 111. It is at once individualistic as in capitalism and collectivistic in orientation as in socialism. Its fundamental tenet is that individuals can only achieve personal success and happiness through engaging in a reciprocal dynamic of giving and receiving. This principle is presented as a universal principle, which is true, but the sources cited in the name of the Rebbe deal specifically with Jews. For example, in page 112, I would read the original. Let me please read in Yiddish, and you can see the translation in the bottom in English. The translation is from the book, the way the book translates it. As bishasel der Wus sich von der Metzius von Aiden, as es kann davon zu kommen durch die Metzius von dem zweiten Iden, was hat mich der Wus, und mistome kann euch etwas arois helfen, den zweiten Iden. So this is the source in the book. It brings one of the sources, but you can see Eden, Jew. I'm not saying the principle of reciprocity cannot be universal. Don't get me wrong. But the question is whether the Rebbe was interested in applying it in global dimensions, when most of his references were about and for the Jewish people. It should be noted that a similar principle of accepting and giving appears in Rabbi Ashлаг's social and even communist doctrine. And there is also controversy about how much he focused on the people of Israel or on the entire world, as shown by Boaz Hus and Ron Margoli. Number 2, the principle, and I'm quoting from the book on page 120, the principle that every encounter with the other should be an encounter with the divine leads directly to a second principle, namely that every social interaction exceeds the sum of its parts. And here it comes, he gets to birthday celebrations. Even a birthday celebration becomes, according to the book and the Rebbe's teachings, a universal practice for revealing the presence of God. That's from pages 137 to 141. The many texts cited by the authors repeatedly deal with a Jew, page 122, 123, 129, 140, etc. In the note, in note number 54, the authors refer to a source, which you can see here to your left, from Chai Elul, Tafshin Mem Bet, that's Torah Menachem. We saw Larry showed us the 71 volumes, where the Rebbe compares the birthday of a Jew to a Gentile. This comparison, however, was written casually in brackets and deals only with a common linguistic name birthday. Immediately afterwards, the Rebbe continues to refer only to Jews. Here I want to show שזה עניין שייך לכל אחד ואחד מישראל. This is a matter that belongs to each and every one of Israel, and ends with the saying, here it comes, and ends with the saying that this is a day to awaken the Jew from the routine of his life and to encourage him with the addition of Torah study, which obviously refers strictly to Jews. However, in the 5th and 6th chapters, there is a turn in the book. These chapters deal with the Rebbe's activities and references to American issues, such as education and jail for criminals. In these cases, the Rebbe refers directly to matters that are also non-Jewish, through which his social universal views are more clearly articulated. If in the first chapters I was debating whether the Rebbe proposed a social transformative paradigm for the world, or whether his goal was to influence the Jewish people, then in the last 2 chapters, the Rebbe's reference to Gentiles is clear and explicit. Thus, universal sociological conclusions can be drawn from it. What is missing from the book is a clear appeal to Gentiles, which can shed new light on the first chapters with universal interpretation, which Wexler proposed, which apparently did develop slowly in the Rebbe's thought. In the 1980s, the Rebbe initiated the operation of the 7 mitzvot bnei Noach, let me express it in the Hebrew way, which aimed to spread and encourage all humanity to observe the 7 mitzvot bnei Noach. His halachic innovation was that the Jews are the ones who must inform the nations about the covenant of Noach, and that these mitzvot are the basis for a moral world society. I remember as a young child from the Galil, the signs in Arabic at the entrance to the villages of the Galil, Galilee, with the pictures of the Rebbe, and below the inscription, you see here in Arabic, Mashiach, yeah, in Arabic, Messiah, and next to it, a list of the laws of Noach in Arabic. So it says, Jid ba'amal al khair, you should do more good deeds. And here it's just like in Hebrew, al kuwa lil salam alami, a koach le shalom olami, the power for world peace. And then exactly like in Hebrew, except of the word mitzvot, which is wasaya, seba wasaya banai noach. You have sheva mitzvot bnei noach. And this is taught, you see also in schools, Arabic schools in the Galil, including the Sefer Atanya, which was not long ago translated into Arabic. Recently, and with this I'm ending, Reuven HaKohen Uriah showed the connection between Operation Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach and the messianic consciousness of the Rebbe. The more the Rebbe saw himself as the Messiah, which I understand that the book is trying to avoid, and the Rebbe saw himself as a Messiah whose purpose was to prepare the world for the age of redemption, the more he developed more and more thoughts about social global transformation. And he appealed to a non-Jewish audience. The survival of the Jewish people from the Holocaust and the fall of communism, which the Rebbe saw in his last years, were signs in his eyes that the time has come to establish a human society calling in the name of God. And I'll use the Hebrew quotation from Tzfania, Gimel Tet, Ki az efoch elamim safa brura likro kulam b'shem Adonai lovdo shem echad. Cohen Uriah also showed that the Rebbe's attitude towards Gentiles developed and changed slowly over time and events, and that the encounter with American citizens, I think that's what Larry, you were speaking about, which were different from the Goyim that he encountered in Russia and Germany, changed his attitude toward non-Jews. Thus, perceptions that were at the beginning of the Rebbe's path intended for Jews only were over the years also referred to a global society. And so, if we take these two, I would say, dimensions, which I feel are should be the second part of the book, be the following book, his messianic era of the Rebbe, and Sheva Mitzvot, the 7 Mitzvot Bnei Noach, if you connect them together, then I believe that even the first chapters of social vision can be understood in a more universal light. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So now we're going to open it up to the panelists responding to one another. And if any participants, any viewers have questions, there's a Q&A section. I see someone raise their hands. People can raise their hand, or they can ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat. But first, if the panelists want to respond to anything anyone else said.
Start with a question. I have a question and a few comments. So maybe I should ask, well, maybe I'll make the comments first and ask the question afterwards, right? That way I can say whatever and try to go fast. First of all, I just want to say that I think it's interesting to compare when Daniel asked about the idea of Chabad houses all over the world. The truth is that Chabad's first thing about the whole world was printing Tanya all over the world. And all of this needs to be compared with the millenarian ideas of the Jews being spread through the whole world to bring redemption. And it has to be compared also with Menashe ben Israel and perhaps others who had similar ideas. And what I'm saying, therefore, is that it may be that this spread of Chabad over the world is a two-part thing. It's generally directed to the real service of the Jewish community. I know I spoke to a student from Sao Paulo who's in NYU, Shanghai. He said there were 3 Chabads there. So the point is that, you know, he's the only Shomer Shabbat student in the whole school, and he's got 3 Chabads. So it's serving that need, but it also is connected with this millenarian idea. And then a very important matter is that a big question about Sheva ben Mitzvot b'nei Noach and Halakha is whether or not the refinements of the Halakha of Jews should be assumed to be obligatory on non-Jews. So as a given example, what I'm talking about, I'll give you, I think, an idea that really heightens the point, right? Non-Jews are obligated, according to Judaism, to observe sexual morality. Now, in Halakha, a man is forbidden to rape his wife. I think I'm using this example on purpose because it's a sort of extreme one, because we all would recoil from such a thing. A man is forbidden to rape his wife. Now, if a non-Jew calls a posek and he says to that posek, "Can I rape my wife?" So the posek isn't going to tell him, "Hey, listen, there's no halacha that says that a non-Jew can't rape his wife," because it doesn't say so in Sheva B'nai Mitzvah. He's going to say, "No, you can't." Why? Because we take the advice of all the refinement of halakha and Jews, and whenever a non-Jew has a similar question, we use it to answer his question. Why do I say that? So the idea of applying all kinds of things about Jews that are written about Jews to non-Jews is not so crazy. So here's my question. My question is for Marcia. Can you comment about the blacks in the background of the picture? It seemed to me, when I looked at this as an ignoramus in your field, and I am a total ignoramus, I did take one art course in college, and I managed to pass it because the paper was on ancient Near East. I could get away with it. So I'm an ignoramus. But it seemed to me very clear that the reason they chose this was because everybody behind the Rebbe is black. Or not everybody, 99% of the people.
It's interesting, and I'll just begin by saying that so many choices go into book design, book composition, and so if Philip Wexler is here as part of this conversation, I would be interested to hear from him what the thought process was, who got to choose the cover for this book, and what the discussions were on that editorial decision, and frankly, kind of sales and marketing decision as much as anything regarding book design and book production. So I will leave that to someone who actually can answer that question if he is here and able and wants to come into the conversation. The background, Jonah?
I couldn't find anywhere in the book where the picture.
Yeah, there's not a credit line on this, right? No, this is why the archival research had to come into play. And so I had to chase this down, and this is why I'm grateful to Chabad and particularly Ellie Rubin for helping me to chase this down. And so, yeah, we were able to get a credit line for the photo, and it's not on the book jacket, it's not anywhere on the covers. And so I've got the credit line right here, actually, and I can read it for you. And so it's exactly what I said. It's coming from Jewish Educational Media. It's photo ID 20763. And again, identifying the photographer, the location, the Jewish date, the civil date, and so as far as just the nominal information that's associated with the credit line. And so this is coming from that bit. Oh, wait, is he here? Or I can say you will be.
I'm just chatting him just to get the answer.
Okay, you're just chatting. Okay, so as far as like the book design and the composition, okay, so that's just at the very most basic and prosaic level of answering the question. What is so interesting to me is, again, why this photo? I think it does so much work visually and aesthetically. It's a great photograph, right? And it's communicating so many different ideas that I hope I was able to get at, some of these in my talk. But one of the interesting ideas too that I didn't comment on was, given, right, that this is a West Indies Labor Day parade, right, is there an implicit evocation too of, right, the Crown Heights riots of 1991, of so many years later? And as far as the relations between communities as being as potentially problematic and incendiary, right, as they are here, seen as being aestheticized. And so that's a kind of ambivalence, right, that I'm glad we have a chance to talk about this. Because the way that I ultimately read this image is that it shows, it's literally incorporating these registers, it's aestheticizing them, it's stylizing them, it's exemplifying how one world connects with another world and has so much difficulty in doing so. It's both and. It evokes this universalism just as it's emphasizing the particular. So the presence, there's this adjacency just as there's the separation, and then the layers of separation, everything that gets you from here to there. And so that multiplicity and that kind of resonance, I think, is really fascinating in light of the conversation that we're having today.
Can you repeat the event? That was Labor Day, it's a parade?
Yeah, it's the West Indies parade for Labor Day, September 5th, 1977.
That's very interesting.
It is, yeah. Because again, you've got issues of community relations, you've got issues of the ways in which people are indeed adjacent, proximate, close to one another, but yet there are barriers, there are boundaries. Here we have order, but then we also know that historically there wasn't always order, right? And so there's a complicated set of histories and associations that are even embedded here within the aesthetics.
I just want to respond. Phil will be, as a small advertisement for next week, Phil will be on a panel next week, and he's going to defer the answer to that question until then. So please join us next week to hear from Phil. We have a few more minutes, and I see at least one hand. So unless the panelists have more comments for each other, I can call on the person. Okay, I will call. I'm going to bring Kalman Newman onto the stage. Should come up soon. Take a second. There we go.
Hi, thank you for letting me join. Hi, thank you for letting me join, and thank you for the talk. Shalom, Daniel.
We don't meet because Corona at work. We can meet here through Zoom.
Okay, a few quick questions / comments for Professor Schiffman. You kind of take for granted, you know, you say, well, what the Rebbe's attitude towards the non-Jewish world, that's really nothing special. It's just a result of the opinion of halacha that Jews should give charity to non-Jews and that Jews should be nice to non-Jews. I want to challenge, I think that in reality, we know that if we look at the Orthodox world, certainly the world that the Rebbe was close to, the Rebbe is clearly an exception to the rule by ways and bounds. In other words, okay, we can forgo examples, but clearly the Rebbe is quite unusual. What other Hasidic, what other Haredi and figure was concerned, would take into, you know, would be concerned with food stamps or with the well-being of the non-Jewish community? I think we know what the truth is. Okay, no one's listening, so we can be honest about that. And certainly regarding halacha, at least from my Israeli perspective, these things are also not at all to be taken for granted. I can refer you to a tshuva of a very distinguished Israeli rabbi who says that it's forbidden to give a non-Jewish waiter a tip at a restaurant. A rabbi that wrote a psak, a very, very prominent rabbi who wrote a psak halacha that a chesed organization that is given non-kosher food to distribute should throw it out rather than give it to goyim. So I think that the Rebbe's position is certainly not one that is to be taken for granted, and it's certainly unusual. That's number one. Number two, okay, we won't make polls who's a majority and who's a minority, but I think the Rebbe's concern, right, as you said, with the non-Jewish world in general, is certainly something unusual. So the second point I want to ask you, because I think you really raised an interesting point about the Rebbe's political cloud with the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, and you compared it with the evangelicals. I just thought of it as you were speaking. It's kind of surprising. One would think that the most obvious example of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach that would be applicable to the American political stage would be the prohibition of abortion, which is clearly part of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. Do you know if the Rebbe addressed that issue at all? Because he spoke about morality in general as a kind of agenda for non-Jews. And it would seem to be precisely kind of issue that it's at the forefront of American political debate, and it's clearly an issue of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. Do you know, did he address that issue? Thanks. No, you're on mute. You're muted.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, what do you do? I thought I unmuted, but I probably muted myself when I thought I was unmuting. I want to thank you for these questions and want to point out, first of all, let me deal with the second one first. I never heard of a position of the Rebbe. I'm sure the Rebbe halachically, again, was against it, but I never heard of any position. I could tell you a funny rumor that 770, before the Lubavitcher bought it, the previous Rebbe bought it, was apparently an abortion clinic, an illegal abortion clinic, before they bought the property. So they did a mitzvah by buying the property. But however, I think that that's true, but I'm not 100% sure. But I wanted to say that I did not hear, he did not take that as a public issue as far as I know. I am sure that one of our friends who knows the literature better than I do, like Eli Rubin, will come up and find somewhere something. God, it's not possible that there's nothing about it. Okay, now, Let me get into the other question, which I can say more about. First of all, it's very funny because you're actually illustrating one of the points that was made here. The Rebbe was affected by living in America. Israeli rabbis have attitude to non-Jews that are totally different than Americans have, including various forms of Haredim. And from the Israeli perspective, there's no understanding, basically, about non-Jews. And it's an interesting phenomenon that I found in many considerations. And of course, right, so I'm going to agree with you that within that context, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was closer to the universal than even most of his peers in the U.S., yet many of his peers in the, they're not really peers, let's be honest about it, right? But if you look at Chuvot of Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Soloveitchik, by the way, these three people were good friends. And that was one of the reasons why the Orthodox community in America was able to make the growth that it did under their leadership in the early period, which made the possibility of what would there be there now. And I think that you'll find that they all had more open attitudes. For example, Rav Moshe was famous for something, which is saying good morning to every single person when he walked to the yeshiva in the morning for chakras. Non-Jew, Jew, whoever it was, he would not walk by any person without saying hello. So I think that that's a good part of the issue here. As far as things like food stamps, I hate to say this, food stamps, prison reform, this is partly selfish because it's a Jewish community interest. We're seeing it today. You got all kinds of Jews fighting for prison reform to get Jews out. It's easier to get a minion in Allenwood than in a lot of shuls, right? Allenwood's a prison, okay? It's not funny, it's sad. It's very sad. And I want to discuss why certain political figures are fighting for prison reform because certain political figures' relatives have been in prison. And so that's a big issue over here, and it's not necessarily in Jewish interest, as you can see what's going on in some place in Jewish community. But I want to say that you're still right. Your point is not wrong, right, regarding Lubavitcher Rebbe. But I just feel very strongly, as I mentioned in the previous session, I was rereading Elliot Wolfson's material, and Elliot's material is balanced. He's not taking the view that the Rebbe hated non-Jews or something like this. It's a balanced position. And in the balanced position, right, what emerges from that balanced position is essentially that we just have to remember the other side of it. We can't talk as if the Rebbe erased the boundary, even if somehow the boundary was going to be messianically not erased, but in the sense of Yeshayahu was going to be somehow overcome. And I think in America, this boundary has, to a great extent, been overcome both for good and for bad. Part of the intermarriage rate the reasons go. Look, that we have now, we have the Democratic, the Republican Party, the guy has a Jewish grandchildren, Jewish daughter-in-law, the president. We have in Biden, right, has 2 kids married to Jews. And we have a vice presidential candidate married to a Jew. So we have, ironically, a double-edged sword here on this openness to non-Jews. And of course, the Rebbe would have put his foot down like a snow tomorrow about this stuff, despite all of this other feeling. And that's why, to be frank, that's why I asked about the cover, because I think that the people who put this together, we'll hear from them whenever they talk, but the people who put this together actually wanted to heighten the idea that the Rebbe had a vision to make life better for all of these people. Of course, these people, many of them couldn't stand the fact that the community was dominated by Lubavitcher. And that's the irony of this picture over here. Right. And I don't want to make a generalization that anybody, God forbid, of the regular citizens supported the rioters, because I'm sure they did not. But nonetheless, there still is communal tension that we know about. So I talked too long. I should be quiet now. But again, thank you for this question.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to be aware of time.
And nice to meet you over this discussion here.
Just to be aware of time, we're a little bit over. So thanks everyone for joining us. I think we should maybe stop sharing on Facebook Live right now. And yeah, we will now, I put in the chat, or really Denise put in the chat, a link to a breakout room if people want to continue the conversations. We very much encourage people to hang out in the breakout room, which I don't know if I guess you have to copy it and then paste it in your Safari or whatever, and the code is SV 2020. So please join us there. We can hang out and schmooze and continue the conversation. But thank you for the panelists so much for joining us. It was a fascinating conversation. I was so happy to be a part of it. And thank you all of the people who have come and joined us today for all the panels. We will be meeting again next Wednesday on the 9th at 12, I believe, for 2 days of panels. So please join us again then with the same link. So yeah, thank you so much. This is the end of the social. Oh, Daniel, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
People can press now the link before, give us 2 minutes before you leave, and it just opens another Zoom.
Okay,
there's no
cool.
problem opening 2 Zooms. So if you let people, before you shut us down,
yeah,
shut us off, just give us several minutes, people can use the link here.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
So everyone click that link, and you'll be in a waiting room for a little bit, and then because we don't want to close this until everyone gets the link if they want, and then we'll join you there. So thanks everyone so much.
Okay.
Cool.
I think we're good. Shall we end this?
I see a few more people. If the people who are still here can hear me and they want to join us, please click the link because we will end this in a few moments. Let's just give it maybe a few. Yeah, see, I see one person dropped out, and then I see Phil and Rivka are still here. If you want to join the breakout room in the chat,
I'm just gonna post the link again.
yeah, and then we'll jump over there.
So let's do
Okay.
3, 2, 1, and I think I'm gonna close. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Bye.